What do you think? How many times a week do you think most people are having sex? Because I've always wondered this.
The average couple, and this is child-free, I think the stats say 1.2 times a week.
Child-free?
Child-free.
Wow.
So
okay.
At a toddler in, I would say 0.2.
Yeah. Once a month?
Like a couple of times a month.
Yeah.
Let's aim for that. I think that's really good. And, again, back to the number of times, I always try and tell people it's not necessarily quantity, it's more quality. Yeah. If you have sex once a month and it's awesome and it fulfills all your needs, physical, emotional, and you feel really connected with your partner, that's enough.
Hello and welcome to Parenthood, conversations about life after kids. I'm your host, Aleeya Hachem, and every fortnight I will bring you discussions about the real and raw realities of parenting, life behind the Instagram filter. Join us as we laugh, cry and bond over the organised chaos that is parenthood. Hi, Aleeya. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So for everyone listening, I have Aleeya Hachem on with us, and she is a sexologist. So Aleeya works at Melbourne IVF as a fertility counsellor and also a sexologist in private practice. She has a degree in sexual medicine and predominantly sees women who are dealing with sexual pain, postpartum, sexual trauma, low libido, etc. So I feel like there is so much we can delve into today, Aleeya, with all of your wealth of expertise in this area.
There's so much to unpack. I mean, it's such a massive topic, really.
Isn't it?
I go in so many different directions with it as well.
Absolutely. And also you're a new mother of a 6-month-old, so you can really resonate, I'm sure, with our audience and myself. I've got two under one's 3.5 and one's 18 months. So the little toddlers, it's a whirlwind, isn't it?
I never understood prior to having a baby, and now I'm like, every mother, I'm like, you have done so well. Well done. The fact that you've gone back for another one, I'm like, you're amazing. So.
It's like, be careful what you wish for, because then you have two of them and you're like, oh God, okay.
Yeah, you bit off more than you can chew.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, our audience are predominantly parents with young children. So generally, let's call it under the age of 5. So what I wanted to really speak to you about was around your expertise around low libido, because I think this is very common with new parents in particular, particularly because what it's like, you're so maxed out by touch. You're constantly holding your children are climbing on you if they're toddler age. It's just like there's such a great energy output that, often we feel like we don't have the energy to, put out further and provide, massive affection towards our partners. I mean, do you hear this a lot in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm experiencing it myself at the moment as well. So I think that really informs the work that I'm doing almost, just because I can understand it first-handly how much parenting is overstimulating. Like, you're playing with them, you're singing, you've got loud noises, you've got toys. It's just full on all the time. And then you're giving everything to this tiny little human. And it's very easy to forget that our partners also need a bit of love and care as well. And it's really hard to dig deep and to give that, especially at the end of the day when they get home, for example. It's like, just don't touch me, please. I can't do another thing. I'm done.
Absolutely. And I actually thought it would be fun just to kick it off with 2 predictions from your experience. So, because the things that I've always wondered. So I know that we're I don't think there's necessarily statistics out there that would be absolutely accurate with these 2 questions, but I'm just curious your gauge on this. What's your guess on how soon most people are starting to have sex again after having a child? I mean, the obstetrician generally says after 6 weeks after birth, it's generally safe. But with the work that you do, what do you think?
I think anywhere between 3 months to a year.
Wow,
I
really?
mean, obviously, you know, it's very individualized, and it's such personal experience, and how, you know, the support that you're getting. There's so many variables attached to that question, but you know, a lot of women or a lot of couples aren't necessarily ready to have sex, you know, when the obstetrician or the physiotherapist gives clearance at 6 weeks, because you know, that's when you're really in the thick of it, right? And you've had 6 weeks of sleep deprivation and feeding and blah, blah, blah. So I would say, yeah, it can take a little while sort of for your body to feel ready for it. And, you know, that's not necessarily from a physical perspective, but also an emotional perspective as well.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking, you know, if you've had a birth where you've had interventions and things like that, I mean, that's, I guess, a sort of physical trauma. I mean, I had an episiotomy and I was like, dude, I had no idea I had to like sit on ice for like weeks on end after it. This is no joke.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and there's that physical aspect of birth, you know, the episiotomy, the stitches, the pain. But there's also that emotional trauma that can sometimes come from birth. You know, if you didn't feel heard during birth, if you had interventions against your will or not that you didn't necessarily plan for, that can be really traumatic as well. And I think, you know, taking time to process that and to speak to someone about that, whether that be your health practitioner or another practitioner as well, like a psychologist or a sexologist, that can be really helpful too in sort of processing that, to sort of come not necessarily full circle, but to feel ready again to connect with your body and to connect with your partner in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. What about if we're thinking now more the toddler age, so, you know, under the age of 5, what do you think, how many times a week do you think most people are having sex? Because I've always wondered this.
You know, the average couple, and this is child-free, I think the stats say 1.2 times a week.
Child-free.
Child-free.
Wow.
So
okay.
At a toddler in, I would say 0.2.
Yeah. Once a month.
You know, like a couple times a month.
Yeah.
Let's aim for that. I think that's really good. And, you know, again, back to the number of times, I always try and tell people it's not necessarily quantity, it's more quality. Yeah. If you have sex once a month and it's awesome and it fulfills all your needs, physical, emotional, and you feel really connected with your partner, that's enough. You know, let's just, I mean, obviously there's place for the quickie, and that's great. But if it doesn't really feed your soul, then once a month, you know, aim for it and work towards that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's achievable. I think.
Yeah. I think that's a really fair point as well around that physical, emotional connection, because fundamentally that's what it is. And I know a lot of us tend to feel the pressure when, you know, you've just had a baby or whatever. It's like, okay, well, how soon do I need to jump in the sack? And then also, you know, how long's my partner going to feel neglected for? And it is a real pressure that I think a lot of us are facing. I spoke to a relationship psychologist actually in one of our episodes, and I said to her, how are people sort of dealing with that from a couple perspective? And she said, look, technically there are 2 options. You either go for it, and even if you're not 100% ready, you know, that's one person and the partner may not be 100% ready, but maybe when you do go for it, when you're in it, you kind of get your mojo back, which I feel like I put my hands up to that category. The other option is essentially just wait and sort of, you know, resist it until you do sort of feel absolutely ready. And that may take a lot more time. And obviously the risk there is that, you know, you'd want to be communicating with your partner as much as possible so that they don't feel neglected for whatever period of time that looks like. I was curious from your expertise with those 2 options. Tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think a sexological point of view is that you can kind of go in between the 2. It sounds like it's a very all or nothing approach. And what I deal with a lot of women, a lot of couples, is I try and say, let's take the pressure off penetrative sex, because that is one type of sex under the sexual umbrella. You know, if you don't feel ready for penetrative sex, what else can we do, right? How else can you feel connected to your partner? There is so much that you can do, and and enjoy each other and feel connected with each other without having that penetrative aspect of sex. There's intercourse, so stimulation of the clitoris, oral sex, hand jobs, whatever it may be. It could be a massage, it could be just simply having a date night, holding hands on the couch, taking away your phone. Different things like that enable you to help feel connected so that you can gradually incorporate some elements of sexuality into that. You start feeling yourself again. You start feeling yourself as a couple again and getting back your identity. That does feel like it's somewhat a little bit lost when you have a child, right? You're no longer just your partner or a girlfriend or a wife. You become a mum. And that can do massive stuff to our identity, right? I mean, I know that I'm struggling with that at the moment as well. Who am I if I'm not a partner or if I'm not a sexologist? I'm a mum at home at the moment. So that also, I think, affects how we are as lovers and how we are as partners too. So, if we take away penetrative sex and just say, let's take it off the table completely, how else can we connect with our partner? And I think doing that with couples and chatting to couples about that sort of, it's like we almost forget that exists. And light bulb moments occur in them and they're like, I forgot, we could just give each other a massage. Yeah. And that's enough,
Yeah. It's almost like, as you said, you always need to relearn that, because particularly with the shock of a baby and your new routine, your routine essentially going out the window, you're just like in survival mode. So, and often as the female, if it's a heterosexual relationship, the female's like, dude, like maxed out, can't deal with you. But as I said, at some point the guilt kicks in and you're like, ugh. Even I found just laying on the couch, we usually would lay on the couch, like, Jules, my hubby, like, hugging me or hand on the leg or just some level of affection there. That was even gone at one point, once you've had baby, because you're like, don't even like put your hand on my knee, man. Like, I can't handle that. So it's almost like it has to become an active, thing that you're firstly aware of. And secondly, I mean, do you find that with couples, you're like, okay, let's relearn this. Let's go back to what we like as far as affection goes.
Yeah, definitely. You have to put in effort. It doesn't just happen naturally.
No.
And also there can be that cycle of avoidance. I know that if we are talking about a heterosexual couple, the women obviously have to put in an active effort to reach out to their partner and to touch their partner and to do all of these things. But partners can also enter this cycle of avoidance as well. Like, they don't want to burden their partner. They know that their partner's really touched out, exhausted, having to deal with a baby all day. And so the partners may just not initiate that contact either. So it is an active approach from both parties. And it's, it's your responsibility to do that. No one's going to do it for you. So, it's just about finding ways to make it work for you as well. Because if you know that you've only got 10 minutes at the end of the day to connect, how can we do that, right? If you're lucky enough to have a babysitter or have family or have help and you're able to go out for dinner, or you're able to take yourself away for a few hours, what can you do in that time? It's kind of like prioritizing those little pockets of time to connect, because it's not going to be what you had before, a whole weekend, Sunday mornings, all of that.
The luxury.
I know.
The luxury of time alone. So you also specialize in sort of the low libido and really supporting people who do have low libido. Can you talk to me about, because I think we're talking about low libido here, sort of, in that you've had a baby and you're just not feeling it. But what is low libido? Talk to me about it.
So low libido, I think libido almost... It can speak to that drive or that desire for sex. And typically after birth, during pregnancy sometimes, but after birth particularly, we tend to see that decline in low libido. And there are a number of reasons for that. So I think I spoke to you the other day about sort of the biological reason as to why that happens. After birth, a lot of women don't know that you typically have the same symptoms as menopause, right? And that's because of that drop in estrogen. If you're nursing, you have a rise in prolactin as well. So those two hormones typically impact on sexual desire or libido. You can have vaginal atrophy, so deterioration of tissue inside the vagina, which makes you dry, and then also that suppression in libido that just naturally happens from those hormones. And then there's also that evolutionary sort of idea of, well, let's try and inhibit your libido because you're already looking after a child. We don't want to get you pregnant again because then you're going to neglect your current child and look after another one. Men don't see that decline in libido typically, but women do. And the reason for that is that we're so close to our food. Like, we are our child's food source, and we need to keep them alive.
That's so interesting that you're, in a way, like, your body's like, no, we've got one child here, that's enough for now.
Your responsibility is to care for your live child. Don't even think about having another child.
That is so interesting. Do you notice, we're talking about heterosexual couples here, but I'm not sure if you also work with, same-sex couples. Do you notice any sort of differences in their interaction as far as, what we're talking about? I mean, do they is it the same essentially, much of a muchness? What's your experience?
I think, if we're talking about same-sex female couple, the woman who has had the baby will typically see that decline in libido. But what they may be better at doing is prioritizing those pockets of time, not having that focus on penetrative sex. So they may be willing to engage in, massage, intercourse, so it is much of a muchness, but we do see couples have that decline in sort of sexual connection and sexual incidents after childbirth, right? But it does differ between same-sex couples, which is interesting.
It is interesting, isn't it?
Let's take a leaf out of their book.
Yeah, like they're more sort of aware of other aspects of affection, like that we tend to lose sight of sometimes, I feel. Like, I'm curious as well. So let's say someone's listening to this and going, you know what, I'm very mindful that I've got a low libido at the moment. I'm kind of feeling bad because, it may have been 3 months since we had, just pulling out a number out of thin air, since we've been affectionate even, let's call it that. How can they best communicate with their partner about this rather than just avoid it altogether? And then often what I've heard as well from, anecdotal stories is that 3 months can turn into 4 months, can turn into a year, can turn into, and then all of a sudden you've completely lost that connection. So, what should we be doing around the communication piece?
Yeah. Firstly, I want to say to all of those people that feel like you're not alone, it's really common. And there are reasons for that, and like I said, there's that hormonal aspect if you're nursing, there's that evolutionary aspect as well. But I think communicating that to your partner to start with is really important so they get an understanding about what's going on for you from a physical perspective. If you've got individual reasons for why you don't want to engage in sex, whether that be penetrative or non-penetrative, communicate that as well. Is it trauma associated with your birth? Is it that you're experiencing pain? Is it that you are really exhausted and you don't have the ability to give your partner any touch? For example, I think identifying perhaps what it is for you that's causing that, or even just becoming aware of the different reasons why it could be happening for you and communicating that is a good starting point, because it's not saying I don't have time for you. It's this is what's going on for me, and this could be impacting why I don't have sexual desire or why I don't have libido. Sometimes what can be really helpful is seeing a sexologist as well so that they can explain it to your partner too, because then that takes the pressure off you and having to have that conversation as well. And then, me as a sexologist, I can explain that to your partner. Well, these are all the reasons, why there could be a dip in sexual desire or why your partner could be experiencing low libido. And when the partner typically hears it from someone else, it's like a light bulb goes off in their head. They're like, that completely makes sense. Yeah. And then you can work towards repairing that aspect.
So tell me, how is talking to a sexologist different to talking to a relationship therapist? This might sound really dumb, but I'm just curious. Like, why would I see a sexologist over a relationship therapist? Because I feel like my relationship is breaking down because I'm not having sex.
Yeah, I think there are a whole host of reasons, that relationship therapists deal with in terms of communication breakdown, but that can be impacting sex. I guess what we can talk to a little bit more is the biological aspect of sex, the psychological aspect of sex, the emotional aspects of sex, and, it could even be cultural aspect of sex as well. That could be influencing libido, desire, even connection with your partner. So we're trained in that. And, we talk about it day in, day out. So we talk about ways to repair that sexual not deterioration, but that sexual breakdown, and we've got access to toys, we've got access to other information, we can talk to physios as well. If we believe that you're experiencing sexual pain, we can refer you on to the right people. We deal with a lot of other professionals in the field, which can also help if we think that you might need it. We've got that referral system as well. Whereas I find relationship therapists, they absolutely have a place. But if we're talking about sexual concerns specifically, they may not have the training or the education to be able to talk to those things specifically.
Yeah, that makes sense. Talk to me about, you said that you have access to toys. Talk to me about, so is that like, do you give people like homework and they have to, get a toy? Like, talk to me about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to normalize toys a little bit more because, whether you have a child or not, it can just add that little bit extra. It can be really exciting when you get a toy for the first time that you can use by yourself or with a partner. Sometimes using it by yourself first, getting yourself into a sexual space first, then allows you to then go to your partner and be like that with them too. And it could be that whole aspect of relearning, relearning your body after you've had a baby. What might turn you on previously or what might have felt good previously might feel really different now that you've had your baby and your body's changed a bit. So, I mean, I know if you previously enjoyed having your breast stimulated, now if you're nursing, you might not want your partner near your breast. So that's a really good example. How can toys inform your sex life rather than take away? And so we can explain that to you or to your partner, and we can recommend different toys as well. I know I recommend this one particular toy to women who experience sexual pain because it's really soft, and it provides good stimulation that isn't overwhelming, and we have really good success with that, to be able to have penetrative sex again. So different things like that, even if it's just a non-penetrative toy or a toy for your partner, whatever it may be.
It's essentially just to help spice things up again for you to feel like you're sort of got your sexy back. Is that essentially what it? Yeah. Cool for that. Yeah. What about role play? I know that, again, I feel like that's probably something where you have the luxury of time, to do your role plays and stuff. But what's been your experience? That it may be less relevant to when you've got young children and you don't have much time. But do you use that as a tool?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we break down the idea of role play even more, I think it basically comes down to flirting, right?
Yeah.
That's essentially all it is being able to have a break from your own identities for a little bit and just engage in a little bit of banter and a little bit of flirting that you may have previously done with your partner back in the day when things were hot and spicy in the beginning. Or, I think sparking up that fun, that idea of fun and that idea of, flirting, I think that's really important. And yes, I go back to that all the time because I think we forget that as well. 100%
parenting, particularly in the earlier stages, and let's call it the first few years even, if feels a little bit heavy. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful, absolutely beautiful aspects to it as well, and watching your children grow and all of those great things. But as you mentioned, the identity crisis that a lot of us experience, and, you know, the to-do lists and the never-ending mental load, and it all just feels very heavy. And all of a sudden you have all these things to do that you never had to worry about before. So one thing I find is just trying to get into the headspace where you even feel like yourself for 5 minutes. And sometimes for me, it's, I do love to, I love a bit of a foodie. So I sit down at a restaurant, and it's only then that I can kind of take a deep breath and go, okay, I'm back, you know, because a lot of the time I don't feel like myself. I feel like the taskmaster just ticking things off. I mean, do you hear that from a lot of clients too? Like, how the hell am I meant to find the time to sit there and use my toy that you're giving me because I've got too many things to do? Like, you know, what do you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in that space at the moment myself where, and I think it is, well, let's take small steps. So you, for example, sit down at a restaurant, you feel like yourself again. How can you feel like yourself again, and what can you do? I know for me, it's doing things like this, you know, speaking on a podcast, because it's what I used to do before baby, and it's inherently who I am. It's part of my identity. I love to put on makeup, you know, even if it's 5 minutes, just to feel like myself again and not be in a mum bun all the time. It could be just sitting down with a glass of wine and your partner, you know, and just having a conversation that's not, you know, baby talk, or that's not centered around your child. Take those small steps, even if it's just like, putting on makeup, having a glass of wine, being like, partner, can you please take my child for 30 minutes to the park or for a walk so that I can feel like myself and just have some time where I am by myself is really important.
Absolutely. And the thing that comes to mind there as well is, if you are sleep deprived, you're already on such low fuel that, I mean, generally, you know, like, you know, any little bit of time that I had, for example, in that first year that someone would take my child, often I'm like, oh, maybe I can cat nap, you know, like, because you don't know when you're going to sleep again. And so it's just trying to fill your tank up with even a cat nap, or, you know, reading a book for 5 minutes, or just whatever, just getting those little nuggets of time to yourself, because they're few and far between.
Yeah, I think self-care it's one of those buzzwords, but it's really important, because self-care looks different to so many different people, but enables you to fill your cup and be a better partner and be a better parent. You can't pour from an empty cup, right? So whatever it may be for you, take the time, 5, 10 minutes, half an hour if you're lucky. That's like a huge luxury, to just, you know, sit in that space of you and stuff that makes you feel good, so that you can sort of get that back.
Yeah, absolutely. What also comes to mind there is I want to stress sort of, not stress as in let's get all, you know, narky about it, but also just sort of encourage the importance of this. Like, why the hell is it even important for us to like worry about what our partner's doing? Like, I'm so busy, I'm over here doing my thing, they're just going to have to suck it up. But I remember I went to a Tony Robbins 5-day course called Date with Destiny, and one whole day was on relationships. And the one thing Tony said, and I'll never forget this, he said, you want your relationship with your partner to be the strongest and the most important relationship in your life, above and beyond the relationship that you have with your children. And at the time, I didn't have children at the time, and I was like, oh yeah, kind of makes sense. And now I think about that and I'm like, well, that's a big thing. Like, that's an active thing that you've really got to work at, because it's easy to look after your kids. It's easy to take all your time up with your children and go to your partner, you know, you're there, but I'm busy too, and get resentful and all these things. But really, it's an active thing, particularly in the first years of pregnancy, to go, parenthood, to go, okay, this is a really important relationship. And the reason why Tony said that is, you need to be good as a team, if you're fortunate enough to be in a couple, as a team, because then you'll create the best environment for your children and everything just sort of flows through. I'm curious your opinion on why is this so important? Yeah,
absolutely. I think, as you said, you and your partner are a team, right? You've embarked on this parenting journey together. If you are in a relationship, absolutely. But also, as I say to patients as well, you know, one day your children are going to leave. And then you've got your partner. And if you don't actively work on your relationship throughout your children's life, then what's your relationship after they leave? It's like full empty nest syndrome. And that's what we see. And so we really try and stress, working on your relationship and prioritizing your relationship at all stages. If we divert my work at Melbourne IVF, I deal with a lot of patients experiencing infertility or subfertility. And it's very easy to let your relationship go during that period. But, that is your strongest foundation, right? We see so many ups and downs, things like fertility, things like grief, stress, family distress. And so how can we really foster that relationship so that you've got someone that's there for you, that can support you, because it's not your children's job to support you. It's your job to be there for them.
Yeah. No, I love that. And even just delving a little bit more into your work at with Melbourne IVF. So curious around, so let's call it, because a lot of the people that listen to the podcast potentially, usually are parents, but, let's say that there's someone listening who has a child and is struggling to have a second. What are some tips, I know it's sort of putting you on the spot here, but some things that they could be considering in sitting in this time?
Yeah, I think subfertility, or what they call a secondary infertility, so the ability to have a second child, is really common. And a lot of the time it gets dismissed, because if you've already got a child, they're like, oh, well, you should be so grateful that you've got one child. That doesn't undermine your need for a second child, to give your child a sibling. I think that's really important to validate what they're going through. I think going to a practitioner, whether that be a fertility specialist, a gynecologist, an obstetrician, someone in that space is really important so that you've got that relationship with that person, so that they can do the adequate testing to figure out what's going on for you, so they can recommend specific things for you from a fertility perspective. I think that's really important. A lot of people, don't necessarily have those conversations with practitioners early enough, and then they feel like they might leave it a little bit too late, whether that be number of months, number of years. And then I think that can also take its toll on your relationship as well, because if you're actively trying in that time and you don't have that support from another practitioner, it can be really, I find that for the female partner, it could be a massive burden for them, because they know when they're fertile, their partner doesn't know when they're fertile, and they have to initiate sex in that time, and it can be a huge thing to carry that. And, a lot of people lie to their partner and say, I'm not fertile, but they just spontaneously try and initiate sex in that time, so their partner doesn't necessarily feel like, quote unquote, a sperm donor. It can be a massive convoluted thing. And I think, just having support is so important, support outside of your relationship, to be able to bounce off and to be able to have that information so that, we can care for you and we can help you through that time.
That's so true. And also, helping those people feel like sex isn't a job, which I've heard from a lot of friends, like it becomes a job. And now it's like, that was the fun part of my life. And now I'm not enjoying that. And I've got a schedule, and what the hell is happening? And it's a chore. Yeah. Like, again, how do people who are sitting in this going, I'm feeling sex is a chore right now, what are things they can be doing to maybe spice things up a little? I guess a lot of the stuff we've spoken about, but anything else that you could suggest?
Yeah, absolutely. I think spreading the responsibility across both partners is really important. So as I mentioned, female partners they'll typically feel the burden of having to initiate sex during their fertile window. I think what I suggest to couples is having like an ovulation tracker app that you can have on both of your phones, so that your partner can be aware of when you're ovulating as well.
Yes.
To sort of share that responsibility so that they can initiate in that time, or you both know when you have to do it. And it can be something that you do together rather than the female partner being like, I'm ovulating, time to go. I think that's really important as well. And it can be something like seeing a sexologist so that we can talk about, okay, What are your turn-ons? What are your turn-offs? How can we maximize that in times of when you're going to need to have sex so that it can be really fun for you? It doesn't have to be boring. It can be trying different things. It can be incorporating things like role play or toys or, or having those conversations with your partner about what can we do in the times where we're not ovulating to maintain that connection as well, so that when it comes to ovulation time and we need to have sex during the fertile window, it doesn't feel like, oh, now we've got to get it up again and go for it. We've got that we've maintained that connection throughout the month as well, so it's not this massive thing, because that can also lead to performance anxiety, pressure. We don't want that.
Yes, you want, and look, I'm a type A sort of personality, and I'm sure a lot of the other type A's out there, when you don't see results quickly and you work hard at something, what is going wrong? And the hardest part about all of this is just it's so out of your control as far as if you are going to have a baby or not, how quickly you have a baby and all of those things are so out of your control. I remember when we sort of started the conversation around, maybe we'll sort of start trying and ideally probably it's about a year away. So I went off the pill. I'd been on it for literally like 8 years, constantly, had never gone off it. And so I was like, my body will probably need 6 months to reset. And funnily enough, it didn't. And I actually fell pregnant a little bit sooner than we had expected, hashtag blessing. But at the same time, I was actually a bit jolted by it because I didn't expect. But the reason why we did that is because I just knew that as a type A, if I was like, right, I want to get pregnant next June, so we'll start trying at this date, and all of a sudden it would start feeling like a job. So I guess I was mindful of my own sort of character in that. But again, totally appreciate that I was very fortunate. But I've got a lot of friends who are, fighting the other fight where, they've been trying for a very long time, and it's not an easy headspace to be in. I could only, imagine. So I think it's fantastic. There are people like you out there who are able to sort of provide that support. As you said, go and seek other additional support in other areas as well if you are feeling like you're in that state yourself. I think just having an army of people around you, and even maybe if you don't want to spend the money necessarily and have, you can always, look on YouTube and Instagram and other areas to maybe educate yourself and realize that you're not alone.
I think just engaging with others who are going through what you're going through can be really validating.
Yes.
You're sharing that same experience, and to know that you're not alone. Fertility or subfertility affects 1 in 5, which is a lot.
Is that right?
Wow. And some even say 1 in 4. So that's 25% of people are experiencing this, and
it's so quietly kept.
Yeah.
Why aren't we talking about it?
It's one thing that you can't control.
Yes.
It's so beyond your control. And what I try and encourage people to know is, what are the elements that you can control, right?
Yeah.
You can't control when you're going to get pregnant, but you can control how connected you feel to your partner, how you spend your months, how, you go and access those services, whether it be chatting to your GP about potential options for you, or, learning about your cycle and to know why we have a fertile window and when the best time is to have sex, so that you feel educated and empowered. I think that's really important as well, just to sort of figure out what are the elements that you can control and what elements can't you control. So we can put all our energy into that and sort of not have acceptance, but sort of understand, well, this is beyond my body right now. This is beyond,
doing the best we can with what we've got. And as you said, feeling us in a state of empowerment, circling all the way back. So let's talk about the low libido. Yeah. So as far as if someone is sitting in that headspace as well, as you said, there are lots of people that they could be reaching out to. Was there any sort of resources or other things that you lean on during that time?
I love the book Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. Have you heard of it?
Okay,
Okay, I'll send you the link. So Emily Nagoski is a sex educator in the United States, and she actually Netflix just have a documentary, and she's featured on it called Principles of Pleasure, and I just started watching it, but get interrupted by a screaming baby at 8 o'clock at night. But this book, Come As You Are, talks specifically to female sexuality, and it talks about female sexual desire. And what I love is the way that she talks about desire as being a metaphor for a car. So brakes being your turn offs and accelerators being your turn on. And if we've got our foot on the brake and our foot off the accelerator, we're not going to move forward like a car. We need our foot on the accelerator and our foot off the brake to be able to move forward and experience desire. So that's probably, it's like my favorite book ever. It's something that I recommend to patients as well, and they love because it's written in a way that normalizes so much of what we all go through as women.
Yes.
I think it's really important to know that everyone's experience is very individual, but also very universal, which is what I like.
Oh, I love that. I'll add those details in the show notes too. To wrap up, how can people find out more about you and your work?
So I have an Instagram called @great.sexpectations.
I love that name. It's so catchy.
I need to work on it a little bit more. But my aim of that Instagram was to provide a lot of educational material for people in very bite-sized, digestible ways around sex, pleasure, and fertility. So there's definitely some gold in there. I'm on maternity leave at the moment, but I work at the Australian Institute of Sexology and Sexual Medicine. So you can find me on aissm.com.au, and a bit indirectly my work at Melbourne IVF as a fertility counsellor as well.
Yeah, I love that. I'll add those details in the episode notes, particularly the Instagram page. That sounds like sort of the most direct way potentially to get hold of you. But having said that, you are with your hands full with the 6-month-old. But when do you think you'll might go back to work? Have you sort of
I'm thinking in the next 3 months or so.
Okay, so not far off.
Not far off. It's a little bit daunting to be able to put that hat on again after. Quote unquote mum, just mum so long, but it is the work I enjoy. It's having those relationships with my patients and being able to help them. And now, having my experience as well, being able to incorporate that and to have that higher level of empathy, I think is really important.
Absolutely. It's a lived experience, this whole parenting gig, isn't it? You can't teach it. You can't explain it. Like, you got to live it and then feel it all. Aleeya, thank you so much for your time today and chatting with us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and give us 5 stars if you're feeling fancy. Want to be part of the parenthood community? Join our Facebook group and follow us on Instagram @parenthoodpod. Now, I'll let you get back to the organised chaos. Until next time.